So if you had to summarize God's Word, how would you do that? Like, where would you start and what would you focus on? Well, in his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus summarized all of God's Word, and he did it in one single statement. Hey guys, welcome to our special series here at 30 on Thursdays, in which we focus on Jesus' world-famous teaching known as the Sermon on the Mount. Pastor David here with you, and in this week's episode, Jesus channels his inner kindergarten teacher and walks us through one of the most elementary, one of the most basic lessons in the entire Bible. You'll immediately recognize it. Here's what he says. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. All right, on the surface, it sounds like this passage combines two very different thoughts. The first one being about how we treat others, and the second one about gates that lead to different destinations. However, what Jesus is actually doing with these two statements is reinforcing the kind of life that he wants his disciples to live, which, as you'll recall, has been the subject of most of this sermon. Now, you're probably already familiar with Jesus' opening line. Do to others as you would have them do to you. You might even know that this teaching is referred to as the Golden Rule, even though Jesus himself never called it that. But did you know that when Jesus made his famous statement, what he was actually doing was putting a new twist on an old teaching that had been around for a really long time? All right, remember the rabbis? Those teachers would study and discuss and debate the Old Testament, basically from sunup to sundown. It was like their day job, all right? And they would demonstrate their mastery of the Old Testament in several ways. They might memorize it, they might explain it to others, they might even summarize it. And when asked to summarize the law, the rabbis would almost compete to see which of them could summarize God's word in as few words as possible. And so in this case, they might say something like, don't do bad stuff to others, or something like it. Now, to their credit, that's a fairly decent summary of the first half of Leviticus 19:18, a verse that does a bit of summarizing itself. But their shortened rendition doesn't really speak to the second half of Leviticus 19:18, the part about loving your neighbor as you love yourself. And so Jesus comes along and he puts a positive spin on their grammatically negative statement. And so instead of saying, don't do bad stuff to others, Jesus states it this way: do to others the good you want them to do to you. Now, at first glance, it might sound like simple semantics. Now, that's just another way of saying the same thing, right? Not even close. Think about it for just a moment. It's not that hard to not do something bad to somebody, but it can be difficult, even costly, to do something good for someone. For example, it's not that difficult to not steal money out of a wallet that you find, but it can be difficult to live generously and to share with others so that they have enough. Or how about this one? It's not that difficult to not be a jerk in traffic. It's not that difficult to not cut someone off when you're driving. However, it requires more effort and love and grace to let that person merge or to let that person move in, especially when you're in a hurry yourself. I mean, guys, can we just agree that this lesson from Jesus is about as elementary as it gets? I mean, it's like he's telling us how to play nice together in the sandbox. Well, this might be a simple lesson, but it's also a crucial one. So crucial, in fact, that Jesus says this kind of lifestyle perfectly summarizes the law and the prophets, the Old Testament. That's why he says if you want to do what God's word says, then you have to do to others what you'd want them to do for you. Now, that's not going to be easy, which is why Jesus goes on to specifically warn us, and he does so by talking about two gates. Jesus says there's two gates that open to two paths that lead to two different destinations. One gate is wide and the path is easy, but it leads to destruction. Now, sadly, Jesus says that there's a lot of people walking on that path. Now, the other gate, on the other hand, is much more narrow. It opens to a difficult path, a strenuous one, and there's not many people walking on that path. However, That path, and only that path, is the one that leads to life. And so Jesus wants his disciples walking that path. Jesus wants his disciples living that life. And as his disciples, we should want to give to Jesus what he wants. And as we do so, let's keep these two things in mind. First, love others and prove it. Don't just tell people that you love them, show it. And the best way to show them your love is what Jesus taught here. We cannot just not do bad things to others. That's just not enough. We need to intentionally do good things for them as well. That's the loving lifestyle that's described in the law and the prophets. And second, choose the correct path in life. Jesus said there were two gates that lead down two paths that lead to two different destinations. Just two. Not three, not eight, just two. Jesus wants us to choose the narrow gate, even though it's a hard path, because that path, that way, leads to life. So be very careful that you don't choose the wide gate. As the book of Proverbs says, there is a way that seems right, but in the end, it leads to death. Guys, you're responsible for your decision, so choose wisely. All right, my friends, this is another one of Jesus' teachings that's not exactly that difficult to understand, but it can be difficult to obey. And so if you want a little more help with it, check out the short Bible study that we've put together in the description box beneath this video. It'll give you some practical tips on how you can do for others the way you want them to do for you. So check it out, and we'll meet you right back here for the very next part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount.